Alright, so friendly reminder that it's important to save your work. So my Blender crashed a little while ago now, and did not autosave. So I have it set up to autosave every 2 minutes and to do successive saves. And it normally also does a number of additional saves as backup so that you can do auto recovery. And for whatever reason, it just was not working. So I lost all of my progress. So I have now remade everything, as far as I can tell, back to where we just were. So let's continue finishing out the rest of this. So I remade the tuner, and I remade this piece here, which is the tuner pin. Let's call it the pin because I don't know what else to call it. And my tuner currently is huge because I didn't scale it. So let's scale this down, and I'm just going to use the reference image to sort of guesstimate the size. I could look up the exact size, but I mean this should be pretty close. So I'm just going to scale until the tuning keys are like sort of roughly the same height, something like that. And if I have to adjust the tuner itself, then I'll do that. So this we'll call tuner, and I'm gonna rotate it. Sorry, I'm not gonna rotate it like that. I'm gonna grab it, and I'm gonna pull this pin here in front of it, and I'm going to rotate these until they sort of match the angle of the headstock itself, and then I'm just going to sort of place them, one sort of stuck on the back here like this, and one on the front, and then just position these roughly accordingly, like so. That looks about right. This piece here I think is a little bit high, so we'll bring it down. And again, doesn't need to be absolutely perfect, but something like that's probably okay. Let's see. Let's grab our reference here again. It looks a little bit low here. We'll see. I'll make all of them, and then we'll see how it looks. So the way that I'm going to make all of them is I'm going to actually hit Control-J to merge these into a single item, and then Shift-D to just place the next one here. And that's looking pretty okay. Now the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to join all three of these, and now we can do a mirror modifier. And I'll just drag the origin over with this little options menu here, just select origins, just that we're only selecting the origin of the object, and then GX to drag over, like so, until it's looking very symmetrical. So let's apply the mirror modifier, and the only other thing that maybe you want to do is just to adjust these knobs. If I select one of these, for example, I can just rotate it a little bit, because these wouldn't all be straight, right? These would all be sort of pointed all different directions. So I'm just gonna, and I'm just highlighting them. Did screencast keys turn off again? It did. And let's grab this here, and I'm just gonna grab Avert and Control L to select all connected, and R to rotate, and I'm just rotating these sort of, you know, semi-randomly, just so that they're all rotated a little bit differently, because that is exactly how this would be. And we can do the same on the other side. Alright, so now let's make a saddle for the bridge, because that's something we didn't do before. So the bridge obviously has a saddle that the strings rest on, and I'm just going to grab some dimensions online so that we can make this exact. And I just Googled, you know, guitar saddle, plastic, bone, whatever material, to find those images. All right, so let's grab this, Shift A mesh to add a cube, and let's get the profile right first, and then we'll get this. And actually, the neat part about this one too is it has the side profile, so we can do that as well. Alright, so let's hide this reference image and then bring the saddle over here to our bridge. And sometimes you do have to make little corrections like that, and if you do, it's fine. And so now I'm just going to mirror that over to the other side of the bridge. So we're very nearly done with this project. We made the tuners, we made the saddle, we made the bridge. Let's string it up. Oh, one more thing I'm going to do before we string it up actually is I'm going to put a logo on it. All right, I'm excited to do a final render. So I added a logo here. That's easy to do. I just added it using the Images as Planes add-on, and then for the color in my shader, I'm just using the alpha of the logo itself is just sort of on a transparent background, and that's the alpha for the image. And then I'm using that to mix between a transparent BSDF and the Pearl shader that we used for the inlays earlier. So this has got that perloid material, and I'm just using an image that I imported as a plane to drive the transparency or the mixing between the transparency and the Pearl shader. All right, it's time to add some strings. So looking at this from the side, we're going to add strings coming out from underneath these pins here, going over top of the saddle, and then along the fretboard to the nut and to each of the posts. So let's do that. And I have a chart of guitar string gauges here. I will be using these here. Let me just bring it up. All right, so these are the string gauges that I'm going to be using, starting with 1.1 millimeters for the largest. So we're going to go Shift A mesh circle, and I'm going to scale it down GX, and I can actually just enter those dimensions here in the X and Y. So I'm going to do 1.16 millimeters in each of these, and then I know that this is exact. And I'm just going to bring that over here to the first pin, and G to grab GY. And you can see it is pretty small, but we're going to center it here on this pin for a second, and then I'm just going to fill it with F, right click, and shade smooth in object mode, and then I'm just going to extrude in a Z. And now I'm just going to start extruding in order to get this positioned how I want. So GX or GY from the side, and I'm just going to put it under this pin here, and it should sort of come out, extrude, and then extrude, and like that. There we go. And now from here, I'm going to extrude it all the way up to the first pin, and it'll go into this pin here. And then from the side, we're actually gonna, just got to bring it to the nut first, and then it's gonna go into this slot here because we made these slots earlier, and then extrude it to the pin. And if it's looking like these slots are not quite correctly positioned, what you can do is SX, because mine look like they could do a little bit better, and just SX to reposition, or rather to rescale those. There we go. And perfect. And then we'll just bring this down, and I'm just gonna tuck it into the pin right in the center like that. Perfect. And now let's do the next one. So we're going to do the same thing. I'm actually just going to duplicate this ring here at the bottom of the first string. I'm just going to Shift D, move it over to the next pin, P, separate by selection, and then I can scale it in place here. Did I lose it? Here it is. So the next one is going to be 0.914 millimeters. And we'll just do the same process of extruding, extrude, extrude, GX. And then we'll extrude this one again all the way up to the end, and G to place it in the correct position, right here like this. And just rest it in that slot that we made earlier, and then E to extrude, and grab it and place it in the center of the second pin, which will be right here. Perfect, something like that is fine. And I'm just gonna continuing with that duplicating, scaling, and extruding to make all the strings all the way down to the end. Alright, there we go, our instrument is strung up. Now we just need materials for the strings. So the first two strings are generally unwound, which means they're just bare metal. So we can just give them the same bare metal material that we've been using this whole time for, you know, frets and the strap pin at the bottom and all that stuff, which was the one that I had called strap pin at the beginning. So I'm just going to select both of these and select strap pin, and that will make that the material for these two. Perfect. And then we're going to make a new material, and we're going to call it copper, because we're going to make a copper material for the top four strings because they're usually copper wound. So we'll go shading, and we're going to go search for, not search, we're going to go Shift A, texture, wave texture. And I'm actually just going to make a cylinder here so we can test this out. Just a little bit at a larger scale because I want to get an idea for how this is going to look. So I'm going to look for that copper material, and let's just plug this wave texture in here to the base color. Alright, so we've got sort of a wavy pattern to it, but to get it to look like windings, we need to rotate this. So Control T if you have the node wrangler installed, but if not, just search for a texture coordinate and mapping node and add them. And then under texture, or under type, switch it to texture. And then I'm going to change the Y rotation to 90 degrees. And I'm just going to make a couple of values here. So Shift A and search for value and just plug that in. And I'm going to plug one into scale. And current scale is 1. Let's set it to 0.1. We're going to have to play with that, but that's okay. And then this Y rotation, I'm actually going to change it to 85 degrees, something like that. And what we're doing is we're essentially building up an area that's going to give us the texture of sort of winding copper. All right, so next we want to get our actual copper material ready. So for that, I'm just gonna search for a copper color hex code just on Google search, just so we can get an idea, and turn the metallic all the way up to 1. And then the roughness, we can leave actually fairly rough. I'm going to leave it at 0.4. And under this base color, click on hex, and the hex color, this one says, let's see, B87333, and we can tweak this if it doesn't look quite right. Let's look at this in cycles. It's looking a little saturated to me, so I'm actually just going to select it, and under saturation, turn it to 6. And that looks a lot better. Perfect. There we go. And now to achieve the sort of string-like texture, because the strings are wound. There's copper wire wound around the string. I've added a color ramp here, and I'm going to plug this output here into the base color. And then I also added a bump. So I went search for bump, and I turned the strength down to 0.3. And I'm going to plug the color into the height. And you can see that we sort of get that wound looking texture. So I think we could probably do something with this. But first we need to add a mix RGB in here so that we can mix this with our copper color, what is our new hex code? It's C59B82, so we'll plug this in here and plug this in here. And then we can sort of scroll back and forth to go back and forth between this, which is just straight sort of gray and white, to colored. And that's looking pretty okay. I think I will actually increase the rotation a little bit more to like 88, something like that. That's looking pretty good. And we'll probably have to play with the scale. So let's go and apply this to the strings. All right, so I'm going to have to apply rotation and scale to each of these strings. Apply rotation and scale. Here we go. And I'm going to assign that copper material to all of them, and then we will adjust the scale so that it looks correct. So there is that, and then let's go into shading. The angle is looking not quite steep enough, I think. 90 should be fine for this. And then the scale value, 0.005, is looking better. And I mean, it's not perfect, but it's looking pretty good. I think it's pretty accurate to how, you know, guitar strings I think actually are. And so the next thing that'll do, just quickly, because this is something that we'll just add to the realism a little bit, is to go and grab the end of each of these strings and just extrude and grab. Oops, let's delete this little guy here. Some little tangs off the end of the strings here. I heard a really good quote. I think it was on the Andrew Price podcast, but I don't know if he said who originally said this or if maybe it was him. But that the quote was just that imperfection is the digital perfection, and I think that really speaks volumes towards what you have to do in order to get something to look real, because nothing, of course, in the real world looks absolutely perfect. You have all these little perfections, and that's really what gives sort of the realism of the things that we encounter in our day-to-day lives. And so if you don't add any little imperfections, then it just won't look real, and you may not know why, and the answer is because it looks too perfect, because things in the real world are not perfect. And if you get a little bit of distortion here or there because of what you've done, like this, that's fine. You know, don't worry about it too much, because again, the goal here is not perfection. The goal here is actually imperfection. So if you made it to the end of this video series, then well done, because this has been a pretty long, pretty detailed build, and I hope that you enjoyed it. We're going to do a couple finishing touches, and I'll just show you a couple things that I did just to, sort of tidy it up a little bit. I added another little bevel just to tighten up the shape of the pick guard here. I added a sound hole stamp, which is just a little piece of paper that goes inside the sound hole. That's just an image that I added as a plane and subdivided, and then just sort of placed it in there. And what else did I do? The logo we went over, how I did that. And then the other thing is with the body here, I have a solidify modifier on this, and it's currently set to 1.5 millimeters of thickness, just because before this was just planes, and really the body shouldn't just be planes, right? The body should be a little more complex than that. It should have thickness to it, right? It's a solid object. So I added a solidify modifier here. I'm going to leave this here as being procedural, and the subsurf modifier, I'll just turn the levels up to 3 and just leave that. The only other thing I'll mention that you could do if you wanted to is to apply the solidify modifier and change the material that's on the back. So generally speaking, right, on the inside of this, you can see that the back material is a little bit glossy, and it's because we had this sort of glossy material for the back and sides, and that's sort of coming through on the inside. But realistically, on the inside, it would be unfinished. So if you wanted to, you could apply the solidify modifier and then go through and make a duplicate material that has no clear coat applied to it for the inside. It's a little bit more work, not really a big deal, but it will give you a slightly more realistic look. Now, one thing I will mention here as well is because I'm just making this for like a render, I don't really care about texel density. I'm not going to go through and sort of do a more extensive UV unwrap on this object because it looks fine. But if you wanted to make a game asset out of this, for example, you would want to UV unwrap this. And the way that I would do that is I would merge all of them probably into a single object. And let me just show you here. So like this guitar here is made out of all of these different objects here, right, with all of these different materials. What I would probably do is highlight them and control J to merge all of these into a single object, and you would have to apply the modifiers that you wanted applied first on each of those objects. So like you can see that got rid of this modifier here, and then you could go through and do your UV unwrap like that by unwrapping the whole object at once, and that way you can set a sort of a more correct texel density for the object overall. And if you don't know what texel density is, I do have a video on it. It's in the UV unwrapping video on my channel. And that's really all there is to it. So I hope that you enjoyed this video series.